What happens when a powerful man thinks he owns you? When he tells the world you're nothing without him? For Ilara, walking away from her marriage was an act of survival. Her husband, Mark, laughed. He boasted to their friends, "Give her a week. She'll come crawling back, begging." He was sure he had broken her. What he didn't know was that she was pregnant. And he never imagined that just hours after his arrogant boast, a reclusive billionaire, a man with his own hidden past, would find her in her darkest moment and make an offer that would change everything. Paris. The crystal chandelier of the Boston Charity Foundation's annual gala dripped light onto the city's elite. From the outside, Ilara Callahan was a perfect portrait of success, her arm linked with her husband's, Mark Callahan. He was a man carved from ambition and privilege, a senior partner at a private equity firm who wore his success like a bespoke suit. Ilara, in a deep sapphire gown that matched her eyes, smiled a smile she had practiced for years, one that didn't quite reach them. Inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Every conversation was a performance, every laugh a carefully calibrated note. Mark was in his element, holding court, his voice a confident baritone that sliced through the polite chatter. "And that's why the market is volatile but ultimately predictable," he was saying to a circle of admirers. "You just have to know how to play the game. It's about nerve." He squeezed Ilara's arm, a proprietary gesture disguised as affection. "My wife, Ilara, she's an architect, or she was. Gave it all up for a more important project." Me. A ripple of polite laughter. Ilara's smile tightened. She had been a rising star at her firm, praised for her innovative, sustainable designs. Mark had called her ambition cute at first, then distracting, and finally, unnecessary. He had convinced her that his career was the one that mattered, that her role was to be the perfect hostess, the beautiful accessory that proved his life was as well managed as his portfolio. Later, near the silent auction tables, she overheard a fragment of conversation from her supposed best friend, Clara, speaking to another woman. "She looks tired," Clara whispered. "Mark says she's been difficult lately. So emotional." The words were a cold slap. Mark's narrative. He had been seeding this for months, painting her as unstable, her quiet desperation framed as hormonal imbalance. He was isolating her, one friend at a time, ensuring that if she ever screamed, no one would hear. The final straw came not with a bang, but with a toast. A potential client, a man named Mr. Abernathy, raised his glass to Mark. To Mark Callahan, a man who has it all, a brilliant career and a beautiful, devoted wife. "Tell me, Mark, what's your secret?" Mark beamed, his ego swelling to fill the space. He leaned in conspiratorially. "The secret? You have to be the sun in her sky. Without you, her world goes dark. Isn't that right, darling?" He looked at Ilara, his eyes glinting with a challenge. The room waited for her dutiful nod. But something inside her, a long, dormant sliver of steel, refused. She simply stared back at him, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, his polished mask slipped. She saw a flicker of panic, of fury at her insubordination. He recovered quickly, laughing it off. "She's playing shy." The car ride home was a silent, suffocating hell. The moment the heavy oak door of their Beacon Hill brownstone clicked shut, the performance ended. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, yanking his tie loose. "You made me look like a fool. You're supposed to play the part." "What part, Mark?" Ilara's voice was dangerously quiet. "The adoring doll who has no thoughts of her own? It's the part that paid for your dress, for this house, for your entire life," he roared, his voice bouncing off the marble foyer. You were nothing before me, a glorified draftsman in a cubicle. I gave you everything." "You took everything," she whispered, the truth of it landing with the force of a physical blow. "My career, my friends, my confidence." She looked around the opulent, sterile space. It wasn't a home. It was a stage, a gilded cage. "Oh, this is rich," he scoffed, following her as she walked numbly towards the master bedroom. "You're getting dramatic again. Is it your period?" She stopped, her back to him. That was it. The final casual dismissal of her humanity. She turned, her eyes clear and cold. "No, Mark. It's not." She walked into the walk-in closet, a room larger than her first apartment, and pulled out a single suitcase. She didn't pack the designer clothes or the jewelry he'd bought her, the golden shackles. She packed the few things that were truly hers, a worn copy of The Fountainhead, her old sketchbooks filled with designs, a framed photo of her late parents. Mark watched, a smirk playing on his lips. He leaned against the doorframe, radiating an unassailable confidence. "This is pathetic, Elara. Where are you going to go? Back to your sister's tiny apartment in Dorchester? You'll last a week, maybe 2, before you realize what a mistake you're making." She zipped the suitcase and walked past him without a word. He grabbed her arm. "Don't walk away from me." "I should have done it years ago," she said, pulling her arm free. His smirk widened into a grin of pure arrogance. "Fine, go. Have your little tantrum. But you'll be back. You'll crawl back. You have nothing without me. And you know it." Her hand was on the front door when he delivered the final, cruelest blow, loud enough for the imagined audience in his head. "I'll tell everyone at the club you've had a little breakdown. They'll understand. When you come back, tail between your legs. We'll just say you needed a little rest." She walked out into the cold Boston night, the door closing behind her with a definitive thud. She didn't look back. She hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the cheapest, most anonymous motel she could think of on the outskirts of the city. In the sterile, bleach-scented room of the Starlight Motor Inn, under the flickering neon sign, Elara finally let herself break. Sobs racked her body, a storm of grief for the years she'd lost, and terror for the future she couldn't see. Her money was in a joint account he controlled. She had less than $300 in her purse. He was right. She had nothing, then she remembered. The fatigue, the recent nausea she'd blamed on stress. Her period, which he'd so callously mentioned, was 6 weeks late. With trembling hands, she dug into her purse and pulled out the emergency pharmacy bag she'd bought on the way, not for pills, but for a pregnancy test. She sat on the edge of the grimy bathtub, waiting for the longest 3 minutes of her life. And there it was. 2 stark, unforgiving pink lines. Pregnant. A wave of sheer terror washed over her, followed by something else, something fierce and unexpected. Resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. She wasn't just saving herself. She was saving her child. Mark would never, ever have this child. He would not turn her son or daughter into another prop in his perfect life. The boast echoed in her ears. "She'll crawl back." "Never," she whispered to the empty room, a hand protectively on her still flat stomach. "Never." She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. But as she stared at the 2 pink lines, she realized she wasn't. The next 24 hours were a blur of cheap coffee and fear. The Starlight Motor Inn was a symphony of misery, the groan of trucks on the nearby highway, the muffled arguments from the next room, the constant hum of the ancient air conditioner. Elara sat on the lumpy bed, her sketchpad open on her lap, but her hands wouldn't move. The creative spark that had once defined her felt like a distant memory. extinguished by years of Mark's casual contempt. She had called her sister Maya, a fiery social worker who had never liked Mark. The relief in Maya's voice was palpable. "Oh, Ellie, finally," Maya had breathed. "I'm coming to get you. You can stay with me. We'll figure it out." But the thought of burdening Maya, of squeezing into her tiny one-bedroom apartment with a baby on the way, filled Elara with a fresh wave of shame. Mark had engineered this. He had systematically dismantled her support systems until he was the only one left standing, the sole provider, the benevolent dictator. Crawling back to him would be a surrender. Crawling to her sister felt like a different kind of defeat. She was staring at the water-stained ceiling, tracing the cracks and imagining them as fault lines in her own life, when her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize, with a sleek, minimalist area code she vaguely associated with international business. Probably a wrong number. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and a third time. An icy knot of dread formed in her stomach. It was Mark. He must have gotten a burner phone to harass her, to wear her down. Steeling herself, she answered, ready to hang up immediately. "Hello?" she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. There was a pause, and then a voice, low and calm, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. It was not Mark. "Am I speaking with Miss Elara Vance?" The use of her maiden name was a jolt. No one had called her that in 6 years. "Who is this? My name is Julian Devereux. Forgive the intrusion. I understand this may be a difficult time." The name rang a distant bell. Devereux. Devereux Capital, a global investment firm known for its almost mythic success and its reclusive, enigmatic founder. A man who occasionally appeared in the financial pages, but never in the society columns. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of global finance. She'd seen him once, years ago, when she'd attended a lecture on sustainable urban development, where he was a surprise guest speaker. He had spoken with a quiet intensity that had captivated the entire auditorium. "Mr. Devereux, I don't understand. How did you get this number?" "I have resourceful people," he said simply, without a hint of boastfulness. It was a statement of fact. "I was at the gala last night. I happened to observe your departure." Elara's face burned with humiliation. He had seen it. The silent, public schism. The look on Mark's face. Her escape. "I see. Ms. Vance," he continued, his tone remaining perfectly level and professional. "Several years ago, before your marriage, you submitted a proposal to a competition for the design of the new Lycée International in Strasbourg. A project my foundation was funding. She remembered it vividly. It was her passion project, a design she had poured her soul into. A school built around a central, sunlit atrium, using reclaimed wood and geothermal heating. A building meant to breathe, to nurture. She had been a finalist but had withdrawn her submission after Mark had proposed. He'd told her it was time to focus on their future. "Yes, I remember," she said, her voice thick with a sudden, sharp grief for the woman she had been. "I have always believed it was the superior design," Julian Devereux said. "It was innovative, humane, and elegant. It was a crime it was never built." Tears pricked Elara's eyes. To hear her work, her long, buried work, spoken of with such respect by a man of his stature was unsettling. It was water on parched earth. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "I am not calling for a simple compliment, Miss Vance," he said. "I am calling with a proposition. I am aware of your situation, at least the broad strokes of it. I know a man like Mark Callahan. His ego is his primary currency. He will not let you go easily, and he will ensure you have nowhere to go." She couldn't speak. He had just articulated her deepest fear with chilling precision. "I am flying to Paris this evening from Logan Airport," he said. "My plane departs in 3 hours. I have a vacant apartment in the 6th arrondissement overlooking the Jardin du Luxembourg. It is quiet, private, and yours for as long as you need it. No stipulations, no expectations. Consider it a fellowship, a chance to breathe, a chance to pick up a pencil again." The offer was so outlandish, so utterly beyond the realm of possibility, that she almost laughed. A billionaire she'd never met was offering her a sanctuary in Paris because he liked a design she'd drawn 7 years ago. It sounded like the plot of a fairy tale, or more likely, a sophisticated, cruel trap. "Why?" she asked, the single word encompassing all of her suspicion and disbelief. "Why would you do this?" There was a longer pause on the line this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. Less the titan of industry, more human. "Let's just say I have a profound dislike for wasted potential," he said. "And an even more profound dislike for men who mistake possession for partnership. Your husband made a public boast last night that you would come crawling back. I found the sentiment distasteful. I am offering you an alternative to crawling. An alternative to crawling." The words resonated deep in her soul. 3 hours, he repeated. "A black sedan will be waiting at the entrance of the Starlight Motor Inn in 30 minutes. The driver's name is Jean-Pierre. He will not speak unless spoken to. If you are not there, he will leave, and I will not contact you again. The choice is entirely yours, Miss Vance." He hung up. The silence in the room was absolute. Ilara stared at the phone in her hand. This was insane. It was a risk of monumental proportions. Who was this man? What were his real motives? She was a pregnant woman, vulnerable and alone. Getting into a stranger's car, flying to a foreign country on his whim. It was madness. But what was the alternative? Maya's couch, the pitying looks, the inevitable legal battle with Mark where he would use his army of lawyers to paint her as an unfit, unstable gold digger and try to take her child. He would grind her into dust. Julian Devereux's offer was a leap into the unknown, a jump off a cliff. But staying felt like being slowly, methodically buried alive. He knew about Mark's boast. He was offering a direct countermove in a game she hadn't even known was being played. It wasn't about rescuing a damsel. It felt strategic. It felt like he was backing the underdog in a fight he wanted to see won. She looked at her single suitcase, at her sketch pad, at her reflection in the dark television screen. A pale, frightened woman with a universe of fight left in her eyes. She had 30 minutes to decide. She stood up, a new energy coursing through her. Fear was still there, a cold current beneath the surface, but it was now joined by a flicker of wild, terrifying hope. She smoothed her clothes, took a deep breath, and grabbed her suitcase. She was done with cages. Gilded or grimy, a cage was still a cage. She would take the leap. The 30 minutes felt like a lifetime and a single heartbeat. Ilara stood just inside the doorway of her motel room, peering through the gap in the curtains. The parking lot was a bleak expanse of cracked asphalt, dotted with rusty cars and a single overflowing dumpster. The neon Starlight sign sizzled and popped, casting a sickly pink glow. This was the pathetic end of the road Mark had envisioned for her. Then, exactly on time, a car turned into the lot. It moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly alien to the surroundings. A black Audi A8, its windows tinted to an impenetrable obsidian. It didn't look like a car. It looked like a piece of the night that had detached itself and come to rest. It pulled up to the curb, its engine an almost imperceptible hum. This was it, the moment of choice made real. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could stay, call Maya, and choose the known difficult path, or she could walk out that door into a future that was a complete and terrifying blank. An alternative to crawling, Elara took one last look at the miserable room that had been her sanctuary and her prison for a day, and she walked out. The evening air was humid and smelled of exhaust fumes. As she approached the car, the rear door opened smoothly from the inside. A man in a simple dark suit with a chauffeur's cap stood by the open door. He was older, with a kind, weathered face. "Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice soft with the promised French accent. "I am Jean-Pierre." She nodded, unable to speak. He took her single suitcase from her hand, as if it weighed nothing, and placed it carefully in the trunk. He held the door for her, and she slid into the back seat. The transition was jarring. The world outside was noise and grime. Inside was absolute silence and cool, leather-scented air. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing her off from her old life. The car pulled away as smoothly as it had arrived, leaving the Starlight Motor Inn and its flickering sign behind in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence, as promised. Jean-Pierre navigated the Boston traffic with an unhurried competence. Elara watched the familiar city lights blur past the window, but they felt like scenes from someone else's life. The grand brownstones of Beacon Hill, the glittering towers of the financial district where Mark held court, it was all suddenly foreign to her. She was an observer, a ghost passing through. They didn't go to the main terminal at Logan Airport. Jean-Pierre drove them to a private airfield on the far side of the runways, a place of quiet efficiency for the world's elite. He pulled up directly beside a sleek Gulfstream G650, its white fuselage gleaming under the floodlights. The Devereaux Capital logo, a stylized D that looked like a bird in flight, was emblazoned on the tail. The jet stairs were down, a soft yellow light spilling from the open cabin door. Julian Devereaux was not there. A flight attendant in a chic, navy blue uniform greeted her at the top of the stairs. "Welcome aboard, Miss Vance. Mr. Devereaux is finishing a call. He will join you shortly. May I get you something to drink? Water? Champagne?" "Just water, please," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. The interior of the plane was less like an aircraft and more like a minimalist luxury apartment. Cream-colored leather seats, polished dark wood, soft, indirect lighting. There were only 8 seats in the spacious cabin. She chose one by a window and sank into the buttery leather. The flight attendant returned with a bottle of Evian and a crystal glass. A few minutes later, Julian Devereaux boarded. He was taller than she remembered from the lecture, dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored grey suit with no tie. His dark hair had threads of silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and intelligent, watchful eyes. He didn't exude the boisterous, performative power of Mark. His was a quiet, self-contained authority. It was in the way he moved, the economy of his gestures. "Miss Vance," he said, offering a small, polite nod. He did not offer to shake her hand, a gesture she was grateful for. It kept a professional distance. "Thank you for trusting me. I'm not sure if it's trust or desperation," she replied honestly, surprised by her own candor. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed his face. "Honesty is a good starting point. Please make yourself comfortable. The flight to Paris is about 6 hours. You should try to rest." He took a seat across the aisle from her, not directly opposite, giving her space. He opened a thin leather-bound portfolio and began to read, the small lamp above his seat illuminating his focused expression. He didn't try to make small talk, didn't ask her invasive questions about her situation. He simply created a pocket of calm for her to exist in. As the jet began to taxi, Elara looked out the window. The plane turned, and for a moment she had a perfect, glittering view of the Boston skyline. The tower where Mark's office was located stood tall, a beacon of the power and wealth she was leaving behind. She thought of him, likely at home or at a bar with his friends, laughing, confident in his prediction. She'll crawl back. A quiet fury, cold and clean, burned in her chest. The engines roared to life, a powerful, controlled sound that vibrated through her seat. The jet accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, pushing her back into the soft leather. And then, the magical, weightless moment of liftoff. Ilara watched as the lights of Boston shrank below them, becoming a web of gold and silver threads against the dark earth. With every foot of altitude they gained, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, the suffocating pressure of her life with Mark, the judgment of their social circle, the sheer, crushing weight of his expectations. It was all down there, getting smaller and smaller, until it was just another pattern of lights in the vast darkness. She was flying away. Not just from a man, but from a version of herself she no longer recognized. She was flying toward an unknown future, carrying a secret new life within her. She looked over at Julian Devereux. He was still engrossed in his papers, a man of immense power, using it not to crush or control, but to, what? Open a door? She still didn't understand his motives, and the uncertainty was a thrum of anxiety beneath the surface. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of agency. She had made a choice, a terrifying, reckless choice. But it was hers. The flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights. Ilara leaned her head against the cool window, the hum of the engines a lullaby. For the first time in a long, long time, she closed her eyes and felt a sliver of peace. She was ascending. Ilara awoke to the gentle touch of the flight attendant on her shoulder. "Miss Vance, we will be landing in Paris in 20 minutes. She had slept, a deep, dreamless sleep that had eluded her for months. The exhaustion had been more than physical. It was soul deep, and the 6 hours of uninterrupted peace in the quiet cabin had been a powerful balm. Outside the window, the blackness of the Atlantic had given way to the soft, pre-dawn grey of a European sky. Julian was no longer in his seat. The cabin was empty except for her and the attendant. "Mr. Devereux asked me not to wake you," the attendant said with a warm smile. "He is in the forward cabin. He said to tell you that Jean-Pierre will meet you once we clear customs at Le Bourget." The landing was as smooth as the takeoff. Le Bourget Airport, like its Boston counterpart, was a realm of private, discreet travel. There were no crowds, no long lines. A silent official stamped her passport with a quick, efficient thud. And just as promised, Jean-Pierre was waiting for her on the other side, his expression as calm and reassuring as before. The drive into Paris, as the sun began to rise, was like entering a dream. The city was still waking up, the streets washed in a palette of soft pinks and golds. They drove past grand boulevards lined with Haussmannian buildings, their ornate iron balconies like lace against the pale stone. The air that filtered through the car's vents smelled of rain-washed streets and baking bread. Jean-Pierre pulled the car to a stop on a quiet, tree-lined street in the 6th arrondissement, directly opposite the magnificent sprawl of the Jardin du Luxembourg. He led her to a heavy, carved wooden door, pressed a code, and ushered her into a small, elegant courtyard. "The apartment is on the 4th floor, the penthouse," he explained, leading her to a tiny, wrought-iron elevator. "Mr. Devereux felt you would appreciate the light." The word apartment was a profound understatement. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling, light-filled space that took her breath away. The entire front of the apartment was a wall of glass, with 3 sets of French doors leading out onto a wide stone terrace, and beyond it, a perfect, panoramic view of the Luxembourg Gardens and the Parisian rooftops stretching towards the horizon. The space was furnished with an impeccable, minimalist taste that echoed the private jet. A large, comfortable-looking cream sofa, a few elegant armchairs, a single, powerful abstract painting on one wall that pulsed with color. The floors were a warm, honey-colored parquet. On a large wooden dining table sat a vase of white peonies, a fresh baguette, a small wheel of cheese, and a note. Elara walked over and picked it up. The handwriting was sharp and angular. Elara, welcome to Paris. I hope this space affords you some peace. The kitchen is stocked. Jean-Pierre will leave a set of keys and a prepaid phone for you. My personal number is programmed in. Use it only if you need it. I have business in Geneva and will not disturb you. There is a sketchbook and a set of pencils on the desk. Sometimes, the best way to find your voice is to draw a new world. Julian. Her eyes went to a sleek, modern desk in the corner. And there they were, a beautiful, leather-bound sketchbook and a row of perfectly sharpened graphite pencils. It was such a specific, thoughtful gesture. He hadn't just given her a place to stay. He had given her back her tools. He saw her not as a victim, but as a creator. Jean-Pierre placed her suitcase by the door. Madame, is there anything else you need? No, Jean-Pierre, this is more than enough. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with awe. Mr. Devereux also arranged for an appointment with a doctor, a woman. Dr. Sylvie Rousseau. She is one of the best obstetricians in Paris. Her office is a short walk from here. The appointment is for tomorrow at 10. Her details are by the phone, he added gently, his eyes kind. He thought you might want some peace of mind. Elara stared at him, stunned. He knew. Julian knew she was pregnant. How could he possibly know? She hadn't told a soul. Had he seen the test in the motel trash? Had his resourceful people found out? The thought was invasive, a violation of her most private secret. A cold knot of her old fear and suspicion returned. Was this sanctuary just a more beautiful cage? Was he another man trying to manage her life? As if reading her mind, Jean-Pierre said softly, Mr. Devereux is a very observant man, Madame. At the gala, he noticed you avoided the wine, but also that you put a protective hand on your stomach several times when your husband was not looking. It was merely an inference, a guess. He apologizes if it was an overstep. An inference, not spying, observation, a quiet, intelligent perception that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with paying attention. Mark had never noticed such a detail in 6 years. Julian had noticed it in a single evening from across a crowded room. The fear receded, replaced by a complex wave of gratitude and bewilderment. After Jean-Pierre left, Elara was alone in the magnificent, silent apartment. She walked out onto the terrace. The morning air was cool and crisp. Below her, Parisians were beginning their day. Joggers on the gravel paths of the garden, children in uniform walking to school, the distant sound of an accordion playing. It was all so real, so vibrant. She was thousands of miles from Mark, from the whispers of their social circle, from the crushing weight of his boast. Here she was anonymous. She was just a woman on a balcony with a view of a garden and a secret in her womb. For the first time since seeing those 2 pink lines, the terror was eclipsed by a fragile, tentative shoot of joy. A baby. Her baby. Here in this beautiful city, she could give this child a life of peace, a world away from the toxic ambition of its father. She went back inside and walked to the desk. She picked up one of the pencils. The weight of it in her hand was familiar, comforting. It felt like coming home to herself. She opened the sketchbook to the first clean white page. For a long moment, she just stared at it. The blankness a reflection of her own future. Then, slowly, hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence, she began to draw. Not a building, not a grand design. She drew the view from the window, the gentle curve of the rooftops, the intricate pattern of the formal gardens, the soft morning light. She was drawing a new world, and for the first time, it felt possible. The days in Paris melted into a gentle, healing rhythm. Elara fell into a routine that was dictated not by a social calendar or a husband's demands, but by her own needs and the quiet insistence of the life growing inside her. She woke with the sun, the light flooding the apartment, and started each day on the terrace with a cup of herbal tea, watching the city come alive. The appointment with Dr. Rousseau had been a revelation. The doctor was a warm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who spoke perfect English. She confirmed the pregnancy 8 weeks along and treated Elara with a compassionate professionalism that was a world away from Mark's dismissive accusations of her being emotional. For the first time, Elara felt like her pregnancy was a medical reality to be cared for, not a psychological weakness to be managed. Julian remained a ghost. He kept his word, leaving her in complete peace. The money for her expenses appeared seamlessly in a bank account opened in her name. There were no calls, no texts, no check-ins. His absence was as powerful a statement as his initial offer. This space was hers, with no strings attached. The power imbalance was undeniable. He was the invisible benefactor, the architect of her escape. But he wielded his power with a lightness of touch that felt like freedom, not control. With her basic needs so elegantly taken care of, Elara's mind, free from the constant hum of anxiety, began to clear. She explored her neighborhood on foot. The 6th arrondissement was the Paris of books and dreams, a labyrinth of charming streets filled with art galleries, independent bookshops, and patisseries displaying their creations like jewels. She would spend hours in the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, losing herself in the scent of old paper, or sit at a cafe with her sketchbook, drawing the faces of strangers, the lines of the buildings, the play of light on a wet cobblestone street. Slowly, timidly, the architect within her began to reawaken. She found herself staring at the joinery of a centuries-old door, the structural audacity of the Centre Pompidou, the soaring vaults of Notre Dame, still bearing the scars of its fire but resilient, its spirit unbroken. She saw stories in the stone, a language she had almost forgotten she could speak, her sketchbook filled with ideas. Not for grand commissions, but for personal, intimate spaces. A nursery where the light would change throughout the day. A small urban community garden built on a forgotten rooftop. A library with a reading nook perfectly positioned to catch the afternoon sun. She was designing for life, for comfort, for peace. She was designing for herself. About a month into her stay, she received a text. It was from Julian. "I am back in Paris for 2 days. I hope you are well. Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow evening? There is a quiet restaurant I enjoy." Jay, her heart did a nervous little flutter. The ghost was materializing. Part of her was terrified. His presence would make this strange, dream-like reality concrete. Another part of her was intensely curious about the man who had orchestrated this sea change in her life. And a third, smaller part simply wanted to thank him properly. She agreed. He sent Jean-Pierre to collect her, though the restaurant was only a 10-minute walk away. It was a small, unassuming place called L'Ambroisie on the Ile Saint-Louis, with no sign, just a discreetly lit doorway. Inside, it was a haven of quiet elegance. Julian was waiting at a corner table. He stood as she approached, dressed again in a simple dark suit, the epitome of understated power. "Ilara," he said, his eyes meeting hers. He used her first name for the first time. "You look well. Paris agrees with you." "It's the quiet," she said, taking the seat he held for her. "And the carbs." A small smile touched his lips. A formidable combination. The dinner was not what she expected. He didn't pry into her past or her plans. Instead, he asked about her explorations of the city. He asked her what she thought of the new Frank Gehry building at the Fondation Louis Vuitton. And he listened, truly listened, as she gave her critique, praising its ambition but questioning its human scale. They talked about art, books, and architecture. She found he was incredibly well-read, his mind sharp and curious. He spoke of cities as living organisms, of buildings as shells that could either crush or nurture the human spirit. She found herself speaking with a passion she hadn't felt in years, the words tumbling out of her, her hands sketching shapes in the air. "Mark always said my work was impractical," she confessed at one point, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Practicality is often the enemy of vision," Julian countered gently. What he meant was that it did not serve his practicality. There is a difference. Under his intelligent, respectful gaze, she felt herself unfurling. She wasn't Mark Callahan's broken wife. She was Ilara Vance, an architect with ideas. He saw her, the person she had been burying for years. As they were finishing dessert, a light lemon tart, she finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been hovering in the back of her mind. "Julian, why? The plane, the apartment, all of this. I know what you said on the phone about wasted potential, but it's so much. No one does something like this." He set his fork down and looked at her, his expression serious. "My mother was a painter," he began, his voice quiet. "A brilliant one. She had a scholarship to study in Florence when she was young. She had a fire in her. Then she met my father. He was a very powerful, very charming man. He loved the idea of having a talented wife, but he couldn't abide the reality of it. Her time in the studio, her passion for something that wasn't him. It was a threat." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. "He didn't lock her away," Julian continued, his gaze distant. "He did it slowly, with praise that was also a cage. You're too brilliant to sell your work, my love. Let's keep it just for us." He bought her the finest supplies, built her a magnificent studio, and filled her life with so many social obligations, so many duties as his wife, that she never had the time or the energy to use it. He extinguished her fire with a velvet glove. He looked back at Ilara, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient pain. "She died when I was 20. She wasn't old, but her spirit was. The studio was full of blank canvases. At the gala, when I saw your husband dismiss your life's work with a joke, and I saw the look in your eyes, I saw my mother. I saw the beginning of the same story. I have the resources to offer a different ending." So I did. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and profoundly personal. It wasn't about pity. It was about empathy. It was about him trying to right a wrong that had shaped his own life. The hidden motive wasn't sinister. It was heartbreakingly human. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Julian." "Don't be," he said, his voice regaining its composure. "Just don't let anyone put your canvases away." When Jean-Pierre drove her home that night, the silence in the car felt different. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the comfortable silence of a shared understanding. The power imbalance was still there, a fact of their circumstances, but now it was colored with context, with humanity. Back in the apartment, she walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping city. Julian Devereux was not a savior or a prince. He was a man shaped by his own loss, a man who saw a reflection of his mother's tragedy and chose to intervene. He hadn't rescued her. He had simply opened a door and trusted her to walk through it. She placed a hand on her belly, where the first gentle flutters of life were just beginning. She was not his mother. Her story would have a different ending. She picked up her pencil. The lines she drew that night were stronger, bolder, filled with a newfound purpose. The next few months were a period of quiet flourishing. The morning sickness faded, replaced by a surge of energy. Elara's belly began to swell, a gentle, wondrous curve that she would trace with her hands as she stood on the terrace each morning. The baby was a tangible presence now, a secret companion in her Parisian life. Her work became her focus. The sketchbook was no longer enough. She bought drafting software, set up a proper workspace on the large dining table, and lost herself in creation. She was designing a theoretical project, a women's shelter. But it was unlike any shelter she had ever seen. It was built around a secure, sun-drenched central courtyard. The rooms were small but private, each with its own window that looked out onto greenery. There were communal kitchens, a library, a childcare center, and workshop spaces where women could learn new skills. It wasn't a place for victims to hide. It was a place for survivors to rebuild. It was humane, dignified, and fierce. It was everything she had needed. She and Julian settled into a comfortable, if unconventional, friendship. He would text every week or two when he was in Paris, and they would have dinner or walk through the Musée d'Orsay, talking for hours about the Impressionists' use of light. Their conversations were a meeting of minds, a respite for them both. There was a gentle, unspoken chemistry between them, a warmth that hovered just below the surface of their friendship. But neither of them crossed that line. It was too soon, the ground still too unsteady. For now, this intellectual and emotional companionship was more than enough. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elara was returning from the market, her bags filled with fresh produce, when she saw him. He was standing on the opposite side of the street, staring up at her building. Mark! The sight of him was a physical shock. The air left her lungs. The vibrant colors of the Parisian street faded to gray. He looked thinner, his bespoke suit seeming to hang off him slightly. But the arrogance was still there, in the set of his jaw, in the way he surveyed the building as if assessing its value. For a terrifying moment, she was frozen. The old fear, the conditioned response to his presence, seized her. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to crawl back into the beautiful cage and lock the door. Then she felt a tiny, insistent kick from within her, a small life reminding her that she was no longer just fighting for herself. That tiny flutter of movement was an anchor. It grounded her. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a surge of pure, primal anger. How dare he? How dare he bring his toxicity into her sanctuary? He saw her, his eyes locked onto hers across the street. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across his face, the smirk of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey. He started to walk towards her, dodging a sputtering Vespa. She did not run. She stood her ground on the sidewalk, her grocery bags a flimsy shield. She lifted her chin, her heart hammering, but her expression a mask of calm she did not feel. "Elara," he said, his voice a low purr as he reached her. "I have to admit, this is a more elaborate tantrum than I expected. A billionaire's Parisian love nest? It's a bit cliché, even for you." His eyes swept over her, taking in her simple maternity dress, her swelling stomach. His smirk faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of genuine shock. Then something darker. Possession and pregnant, he breathed, a strange, acquisitive gleam in his eye. My child. You are going to keep my child from me. This is my child, Mark, she said, her voice steady and cold. You forfeited any right to be a part of its life when you told me to crawl back to you. He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Oh, Ellie, don't be so dramatic. You were hormonal, I forgive you. We can go home. We'll tell everyone you were on an extended holiday in Europe. It's time to end this little game. He reached for her arm. She pulled back sharply. It's not a game. It's my life, and you are no longer in it. The rejection, so clear and final, wiped the smirk from his face. His expression hardened into the familiar mask of fury she knew so well. Don't be a fool. What do you think this man Devereaux wants with you? A pregnant runaway wife? You're a temporary amusement for him. A charity case. When he gets bored, he'll throw you out, and you'll have nothing. Again, I am offering you a way back to your life. To our life. The life you're offering is a cage, Mark. I'm done with cages, she said. This is a bigger cage, he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You're just a kept woman. You traded my control for his. At least with me, you had status. With him, you're just a secret. He was using his old weapons, belittling her, defining her reality for her, making her doubt her own choices. The words were designed to find the cracks in her confidence and break them open. 6 months ago, they would have worked, but she was not the same woman. She had spent months breathing free air, rebuilding her sense of self from the ground up. She had a life, a purpose, a child to protect. The difference, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised them both, is that Julian gave me a key. You only ever changed the locks. Now, I need you to leave. I'm not going anywhere, he snarled, taking a step closer. You are my wife. No, a quiet voice said from behind Alara. She is not, Julian. He had appeared as silently as the dusk. He wasn't in a suit, but in casual jeans and a dark sweater. He didn't look threatening, but his presence shifted the entire dynamic of the street. He simply stood beside Alara, a solid, calming force. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his support like a physical shield. Mark stared at Julian, his expression a mixture of hatred and envy. Devereaux, the great man himself, come to protect your new pet project? Julian ignored the jibe. His gaze was fixed on Mark, his eyes cold and analytical. Mr. Callahan, you are trespassing on a private matter. Alara has made her wishes clear. I suggest you book a flight back to Boston. There is nothing for you here. Her child is here, Mark spat. A child she is carrying, and a child she will protect from your particular brand of fatherhood, Julian said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with ice. I know your firm has been trying to secure a second round of funding for the Atherton project. I am a primary investor in the consortium you're courting. Your behavior here, harassing a pregnant woman on a public street, could be seen as indicative of poor judgment, unstable, the kind of thing that makes investors nervous. It was a checkmate, delivered without a single raised voice. Mark's face went pale. Julian wasn't threatening him physically. He was threatening the one thing Mark truly valued, his reputation, his career, his money. Mark stared at Julian, then at Alara, his face a mask of impotent rage. He saw her standing there, not broken or begging, but defended, protected, and strong. He saw that he had lost, utterly and completely. Without another word, he turned and stalked away, a ghost finally banished from the feast. Ilara let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak. Julian turned to her, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, tears of relief and residual fear blurring her vision. He said I was just trading one cage for another." Julian's gaze was direct and full of a profound sincerity. "Ilara, the only person who can build a cage around you is you. My only intention was to give you the space and the tools to build a door instead." Did it work? She looked from his earnest face to the beautiful building that housed her sanctuary, her hand resting on the life within her. She thought of the designs on her computer, the blueprint for a place of healing born from her own pain. "Yes," she whispered, a watery smile breaking through the tears. It worked. The confrontation with Mark left an echo, not of fear, but of finality. It was a door slammed shut on the past, the lock turned. But it also brought the quiet, unresolved questions about her future with Julian into sharp focus. He had protected her, not by fighting her battle for her, but by strategically dismantling her opponent. He had treated her as an ally, not a victim to be rescued. That evening, the beautiful apartment felt different. It was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a home she had defended. Julian had offered to stay in a hotel to give her space, but she had insisted he stay for dinner. She needed to close this circle, to move from the ambiguity of their arrangement to the clarity of truth. She made a simple pasta, and they ate at the dining table, which was now covered in her architectural drawings. The blueprints for the women's shelter were spread out, a testament to her work over the past months. For a while, they ate in a comfortable silence. Then, Ilara pushed her plate aside. "Your threat to him," she said, "about his funding. You would have done it, wouldn't you?" Julian met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes. Men like Callahan only understand the language of power and consequence. I spoke to him in his native tongue. Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for today. For everything. But Julian, I can't live on your charity forever. I won't. I've been working on this." She gestured to the blueprints. "It's just a design, a concept, but it's the best work I've ever done. I need to stand on my own feet. For me, and for the baby." He looked at the drawings, not with a cursory glance, but with the focused eye of someone who understood design. He spent several minutes studying the layout, the flow of the spaces, the notes she'd made in the margins about materials and light. "This isn't a concept, Ilara," he said finally, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "This is a manifesto. It's a statement about dignity, safety, and community. It's brilliant." He looked up at her. "The Devereux Foundation has a philanthropic fund for innovative urban architecture. We focus on projects that have a significant social impact. We receive hundreds of proposals a year." He paused, and her heart began to beat faster. "This," he said, tapping the drawings, "is better than anything I've seen in the last 5 years. I want you to submit it. Not to me, but to the board. I will recuse myself from the vote, of course. But I think it has a very strong chance of being funded. Fully funded." Ilara stared at him, speechless. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a professional opportunity, a legitimate pathway to independence built on the foundation of her own talent. He was offering her a way to turn her pain into a tangible, lasting legacy that could help countless other women. It was the greatest gift he could have possibly given her. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed. "Say you'll do it," he urged gently. "This deserves to be built." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a very long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, Okay. A tender smile transformed his usually serious features. He reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to lightly touch the edge of one of the blueprints, a gesture of shared respect for the work. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The last barrier between them, the unspoken dynamic of benefactor and beneficiary, had dissolved, replaced by the equilibrium of professional peers. What was left was something simpler and infinitely more complicated, the quiet, powerful attraction that had been simmering between them for months. "Elara," he said, his voice dropping, becoming more personal. "There is something else I need to confess." She waited, her breath caught in her throat. "My mother," he began. "The story I told you was true. But I left a part out, the part about me. I was a teenager when I started to understand what my father was doing to her, how he was dimming her light. I saw it, but I did nothing. I was a child, yes, but I was old enough to speak up, to defend her. And I was silent. I was afraid of him, of his anger, of losing the comfort and privilege he provided. His gaze was filled with a shame that was decades old, but still raw. When she died, I promised myself I would never again stand by and watch a brilliant woman be diminished by a man's ego. When I saw you that night at the gala, it was like a second chance, a chance to do what I was too cowardly to do for my own mother. His vulnerability was a raw, open wound. She finally understood the depth of his motivation. This was his redemption, not just hers. He wasn't just saving her. He was, in some way, trying to save the memory of his mother and forgive the boy he had been. "You were a child, Julian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You can't carry that blame." "Perhaps," he said, "but it has driven me. It drove me to find you. It drove me to offer you this apartment. And I have tried every step of the way to use my power in the way my father never did. To empower, not to possess." He finally looked up and met her eyes, his own shining with an intensity that made her heart ache. But somewhere along the way, my motives shifted. It stopped being about my mother, and it started being about you. The air crackled with the unspoken truth. "I have come to admire you more than anyone I have ever met, Elara Vance," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur. "Your resilience, your fire, your talent, the way you see the world, and I have fallen in love with you." He said it simply, as a statement of fact. There was no demand in his words, no expectation. It was an offering, laid bare on the table between them, next to the blueprints of her future. Elara felt a profound sense of rightness, of a circle completing. This wasn't a fairy tale romance. This was something real, forged in trauma and rebuilt with respect, empathy, and shared ideals. He hadn't fallen for a damsel in distress. He had fallen for the woman she was becoming, the woman he had helped her see in herself again. And she, in turn, had fallen for him. For his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, his brilliant mind, and the deep well of kindness he tried so hard to hide behind a professional exterior. She stood up, walked around the table, and stopped in front of him. He looked up at her, his expression uncertain for the first time. She didn't say a word. She simply leaned down and kissed him. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief. It was a kiss of deep, mutual understanding. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances, of quiet healing, and of a future waiting to be built together. It was the language of light and stone, a promise whispered in the heart of Paris. 1 year later, the Parisian sunlight streamed through the same floor-to-ceiling windows, but it illuminated a different world. The large dining table was still a workspace, But now the architectural blueprints for the Vance house, the board had insisted on naming the shelter after her, shared space with an array of baby bottles, a half-finished teething ring, and a small plush giraffe. In the center of the living room, on a soft sheepskin rug, Julian Devereux sat cross-legged on the floor, making a ridiculously complicated face at the 6-month-old baby girl propped up against a cushion. The baby, Lily Rose Devereux, gurgled with delight and reached out a tiny, chubby hand to bat at his nose. Lily had Elara's sapphire eyes and Julian's quiet, observant nature. She was a child of peace, born into a world of love and light, a world her mother had fought so hard to create for her. Elara stood by the window watching them. A soft smile played on her lips. The sight of this powerful, formidable man, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, utterly captivated by their tiny daughter, filled her heart with a warmth that was almost overwhelming. Her life was unrecognizable from the suffocating existence she had fled in Boston. The Vance house was now under construction in a quiet neighborhood in the 19th arrondissement, a rising structure of sustainable wood and recycled steel. Elara was on site several times a week, her hard hat on, overseeing the project with a confidence that felt like a second skin. She was no longer just an architect. She was a creator, a leader, a testament to the fact that a new foundation could be laid at any point in life. Her relationship with Julian had blossomed into a deep and profound partnership. They were not married, not yet. They were in no rush. They were too busy building their life, their family, their future, on a foundation of mutual respect and absolute trust. He was her staunchest supporter and her most astute critic, pushing her to be bolder in her designs. She, in turn, had brought a softness and a light into his carefully ordered world, teaching him the joy of unstructured Sunday mornings and the simple pleasure of falling asleep with a baby on his chest. The power imbalance that had once defined their circumstances had found its equilibrium. He was still a billionaire, and she was a working architect, but in their home, they were simply Julian and Elara, partners in everything. Mark was a distant memory, a ghost she had long since stopped thinking about. She had heard through her sister Maya that his firm had lost the Atherton project funding. His reputation had taken a hit, and his carefully constructed world had begun to crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. He had tried to contest the divorce, to lay claim to Lily, but Julian's lawyers, combined with Elara's own testimony and evidence of his financial control, had left him with no ground to stand on. He had faded from her life, a footnote in a story that had become an epic. Julian looked up from his daddy duties and caught her eye. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that was reserved only for her and their daughter. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was just thinking about blueprints," she said, walking over to join them on the rug. She sat down, and Lily immediately twisted around to lean against her mother's leg. "The shelter?" he asked, stroking Lily's fine, dark hair. "That," Elara said. "And others." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of him. "I was thinking about the blueprint of us, how we started with a broken foundation and built this." She gestured around the room, at the baby, at the drawings, at the life they had made. Julian wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You drew the plans, Elara," he said softly. "I just provided some of the materials." She looked at the plans for the Vance house, the clean lines promising safety and a new beginning for so many women. Then she looked at Lily, their own beautiful, perfect creation. She was building more than just buildings. She was building a future. Outside, the bells of a nearby church began to chime, their notes drifting on the afternoon air. It was a sound that had once been foreign and was now the soundtrack of her home. She had been flown to Paris as a desperate, pregnant woman escaping a boastful ex-husband. She had been offered a sanctuary and had turned it into a life. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, built not on magic, but on resilience, courage, and the quiet, extraordinary power of a second chance. Elara's story isn't about being rescued by a billionaire. It's a story about what happens when a woman, pushed to her breaking point, reclaims her own power. It's about finding out that the strongest foundation you can ever build is the one you design yourself. True freedom isn't about escaping a cage. It's about realizing you had the blueprints for the door all along. What did you think of Elara's journey? Do you believe Julian's motives were pure from the start, or did they evolve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic and emotional real-life stories. Thanks for watching.